I thought my grandfather was gone. Then my ex found him in the hospital. The phone rang at 3:47 in the morning, and I almost didn't answer it. 3 weeks into the collapse, you learn that nothing good comes through a phone line after dark. The cellular networks had been failing since day 9, dropping in and out like a dying heartbeat. And most people had stopped trusting them entirely. But something about seeing Rachel's name on that cracked screen made my thumb move before my brain could object. Rachel, my ex-girlfriend. The woman who'd left me 14 months ago because I couldn't commit to anything beyond my own survival routines. Ironic, really, considering what the world had become. Marcus? Her voice was tight, controlled, the way she sounded when she was holding back panic with both hands. I found him. I sat up on the cot in my barricaded apartment, the sleeping bag falling away from my chest. The generator hummed its low mechanical prayer in the corner. Found who? Your grandfather, Gerald. He's alive, Marcus. He's in Mercy General. The words hit me like a physical blow. My grandfather had been missing for 19 days. Since the first wave of infections swept through the eastern corridor, since the military quarantine lines fractured and the dead began walking through suburban streets like confused tourists, I'd assumed the worst. Everyone assumed the worst. That was the new default setting for human expectation. That's impossible, I said, standing now, pacing the 3 steps my cramped living space allowed. Mercy General was overrun on day 4. The news footage. The North Wing held, Rachel interrupted. They sealed it off. There's a pocket of survivors in there, maybe 40 people. Medical staff, patients, some civilians who made it past the barricades before they locked down. Your grandfather is one of them. How do you know this? How did you? I'm working with a relay group out of the East Side Community Center. We've been mapping survivor pockets, trying to coordinate supply drops. One of our scouts made contact with someone inside Mercy through a ham radio. They gave us a patient list. Gerald Whitfield was on it. I pressed my palm against the cold window glass. Outside, the street was empty in that specific way that no longer meant peaceful. 3 burned-out cars sat where they'd been abandoned 2 weeks ago. A pharmacy across the road had its windows shattered, shelves gutted. And somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, shapes moved with that wrong gait. That shuffling, purposeless drift that meant you stayed inside, stayed quiet, stayed invisible. 2 of them passed under a streetlight that still functioned. Their silhouettes were unmistakable. One was missing an arm below the elbow. The other wore what had once been a nurse's uniform, now blackened with dried fluids I refused to identify. They moved east, drawn by some stimulus I couldn't perceive. Marcus, are you listening? I'm here. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. You're telling me my grandfather is alive in a hospital that's surrounded by infected, in a part of the city that's been written off by every evacuation protocol. Yes. And you're calling me because the North Wing supplies are running out. They have maybe 5 days before they're forced to attempt a breakout, with patients who can't walk, staff who haven't slept in weeks, and 0 military support. If you want to see him again, you need to move. Now, not tomorrow, not when it feels safe. Now. I closed my eyes. Gerald Whitfield. 78 years old, Korean War veteran, the man who taught me to fish, to change a tire, to sit with silence and not be afraid of it. The man who'd raised me after my parents died in that accident when I was 11. The man I hadn't been able to reach when everything fell apart because I'd been too focused on securing my own position, my own supplies, my own pathetic fortress of solitude. Where do I meet you? I asked. Rachel exhaled. Relief or resignation, I couldn't tell which. corner of 5th and Broadmoor. Dawn. Bring everything you can carry and nothing you can't afford to lose. She hung up before I could ask anything else. I spent the next 2 hours in that methodical preparation, moving through my apartment with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 19 days rehearsing for exactly this kind of departure. The backpack came first, a 60-liter hiking pack I'd bought 3 years ago for a camping trip I never took. Into it went water purification tablets, 4 bottles of water, 6 cans of food, a first aid kit I'd assembled from pharmacy raids during the first chaotic week, a multi-tool, 2 flashlights, spare batteries, and a change of clothes sealed in a plastic bag. The crowbar leaned against the door where I kept it. Not a weapon by design, but it had become one by necessity. I'd used it twice. Once to pry open a jammed fire door during a supply run. Once to defend myself against a man who'd decided my canned goods were worth more than our shared humanity. I'd hit him in the shoulder and he'd run. I still felt sick about it. The knife went on my belt, a hunting blade my grandfather had given me on my 18th birthday. The handle was worn smooth from his hands before mine. It felt like carrying a piece of him. I checked the apartment one final time. The barricade on the main door. Furniture stacked and braced with 2x4s I'd pulled from a construction site. The windows sealed with plastic sheeting and duct tape, not against the infected, but against the smell that had begun to permeate everything outside. The small herb garden on the windowsill that would die without me. The photo on the refrigerator, me and Gerald at the lake, both of us grinning, holding up fish too small to keep but too perfect to release without documentation. I took the photo, folded it carefully, slid it into my jacket pocket. The route to 5th and Broadmoor was 12 blocks. Under normal circumstances, a 15-minute walk. Now, it required mapping every known danger zone, every blind corner, every building that had been reported as compromised. I'd been keeping a hand-drawn map on my kitchen wall. Red X marks for confirmed infected clusters, blue circles for known survivor holdouts, yellow lines for routes I'd personally verified as passable. The path I chose wound through residential side streets, avoiding the main commercial corridors where the infected tended to congregate. Something about the open spaces, the echoing architecture, the lingering sense of food from restaurants and grocery stores drew them. They clustered in parking lots and intersections like moths around vanished flames. I left through the fire escape at the back of the building. The metal stairs groaned under my weight, and I froze on each landing, listening. The pre-dawn air was cool, carrying the faint, acrid tang of distant fires that never seemed to fully extinguish. Somewhere to the south, a car alarm was cycling through its pattern, a sound so constant over the past weeks that my brain had nearly deleted it from conscious processing. The alley below was clear. I dropped the last few feet, boots hitting concrete, and immediately pressed myself against the brick wall, scanning both directions. Nothing moved. The dumpsters sat like sleeping animals. A bicycle lay on its side, chain rusted, spokes bent. I moved north, keeping to shadows, walking with deliberate softness. Every step was a negotiation between speed and silence. The infected responded to sound. That much everyone had learned in the first terrible days. Not just loud sounds, persistent sounds, rhythmic sounds. A door slamming would draw attention. Footsteps, if steady and incautious, could pull them from a block away. 3 blocks in, I encountered my first obstacle. A delivery truck had jackknifed across the narrow street. Its cargo of bottled water cases spilled across the pavement like scattered building blocks. Some had been scavenged. Most remained, their plastic wrapping intact. I grabbed 2 bottles, stuffing them into the side pockets of my pack. Then climbed over the truck's cab, using the side mirror as a foothold. On the other side, a figure stood motionless in the middle of the road. My hand found the crowbar before my mind finished processing the image. The figure was 30 meters ahead, facing away from me, male, tall, wearing a torn business suit. He wasn't moving. That could mean either thing. I waited, counted to 60 in my head, watching for the telltale signs. The living moved with purpose, with adjustment, with a constant micro-corrections of balance and awareness. They shifted weight, turned their heads, reacted to the environment. The infected stood like forgotten mannequins until something triggered their attention. Then they moved with a suddenness that betrayed the decay in their limbs. This figure did nothing. No sway, no head turn, no reaction to the sound I'd made climbing over the truck. Either profoundly still or profoundly dead on its feet. I chose the side route. A narrow gap between two brownstones, barely wide enough for my pack. I shuffled through sideways, the brick scraping against my jacket, emerging into a small courtyard garden that had once been someone's pride. Roses grew wild now, unpruned, spilling over a wrought iron fence. A child's swing set stood empty, one seat hanging by a single chain. The courtyard connected to another alley, which fed into Morrison Street, 2 blocks from my destination. I was making good time. The sky was shifting from black to deep blue, the first suggestion of dawn pressing against the horizon. Rachel had said dawn. I wanted to be early. Being late in this world meant being left behind. And being left behind meant being alone. And being alone meant dying by inches. Morrison Street opened before me, wider than the alleys, more exposed. I crouched at the corner and studied the terrain. A row of shops, a laundromat, a Thai restaurant, a barber shop with its pole still rotating in some battery-powered defiance of the apocalypse. No movement, no shapes in doorways. The infected had patterns, almost migratory, and this area seemed to be in a lull. I crossed quickly, staying low, my boots finding the quietest path along the gutter's edge where dead leaves had accumulated into a soft carpet. Halfway across, I heard something that made me stop. Crying. Soft, muffled, but unmistakable, coming from inside the laundromat. Every survival instinct I developed screamed at me to keep moving. Sounds meant complications. Complications meant delays. Delays meant death. But the crying was human, achingly, desperately human. And 19 days hadn't yet killed that part of me that responded to it. I approached the laundromat's door. The glass was intact, which was unusual. Inside, the machine sat in rows like metallic tombstones. The crying came from the back. "Hello?" I whispered through the door crack. "I'm not infected. I'm passing through." The crying stopped. Silence. Then a small voice. "Are you real?" "I'm real. Are you hurt?" A pause. Then the movement. A woman emerged from behind the row of dryers, young, maybe early 20s, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She held a baseball bat with both hands, her knuckles white. Her eyes were red from crying, but sharp with assessment. "How many are you?" she asked. "Just me. I'm heading to 5th and Broadmoor, meeting someone." "At dawn?" "Yes." She studied me through the glass. Whatever calculation she was running, I apparently passed. She lowered the bat slightly. "I've been stuck here since last night. There were 3 of them outside when I ducked in. I think they've moved on, but I can't make myself open the door." I understood that paralysis, the first time I'd had to open a door not knowing what was on the other side. My hands had shaken so badly I could barely grip the handle. "They've moved on," I confirmed. "The street's clear. I just crossed it." "Where are you going?" "Fifth and Broadmoor. That's toward the hospital district." "Yes." Her eyes widened slightly. "Mercy General?" I didn't answer, which was answer enough. "My name's Danny," she said. "I'm a nursing student, second year, or I was." She swallowed. "If you're going to Mercy, I want to come with you." I should have said no. Every survival guide, every post-collapse wisdom said smaller groups moved faster, attracted less attention, required fewer resources. But Danny was a nursing student, and I was heading toward a hospital full of people who might need medical knowledge. The math was simple. "Then we move now," I said. "Stay close, stay quiet." She opened the door. Rachel was already waiting when we reached the corner of 5th and Broadmoor. She stood beneath the awning of a shuttered bookstore, her posture tense and watchful, a large duffel bag at her feet. She'd cut her hair since I'd last seen her. Shorter now, practical, framing a face that had grown leaner in the weeks since the world changed. When she saw me approach with Danny trailing behind, her expression shifted through surprise, calculation, and something I couldn't read. "You brought someone," she said. Not accusatory, observational. Danny, nursing student. She was trapped on my route. Rachel's eyes moved to Danny, assessing. "Can you keep up? We're covering 6 miles through contested ground." Danny straightened. "I walked here from the university campus when things fell apart. That's 8 miles through worse." Rachel nodded once. That was enough. She never wasted words on conversations that were already settled. It was something I'd admired about her during our relationship and resented afterward. That efficiency with language that could feel like dismissal. "Here's what I know," Rachel said, pulling a folded map from her jacket. She spread it against the bookstore window, and I recognized the same kind of hand-drawn annotations I'd been making on my own walls. Red zones, blue zones, transit corridors. "Mercy General is here." She tapped a point roughly 6 miles northeast. The infection density increases as we approach the medical district. Hospitals attracted the sick early on, and when the sick turned, they stayed. The area within 3 blocks of the hospital is heavily populated with infected. "How heavily?" I asked. Our scout estimated 200 or more in a 3-block radius. They're concentrated around the main entrance and the emergency department on the south side. But the north wing, where your grandfather is, faces Oakmont Avenue. That street has lower density, maybe 20 to 30 stragglers. 20 to 30 is still 20 to 30, Danny said quietly, which is why we're not going in through the street. Rachel traced a line on the map. There's a service tunnel that connects the hospital's boiler room to the utility building on Oakmont. It was used for steam pipe maintenance. Our scout confirmed the tunnel entrance is accessible from the utility building's basement. The infected haven't found it because the door is steel, unmarked, and below ground level. I studied the route. So we get to the utility building, access the basement, enter the tunnel, and come up inside the hospital's boiler room, which connects to the north wing's lower level through a maintenance corridor. From there, we're inside the sealed zone. What about getting out? With patients who can't walk? Rachel folded the map. "One problem at a time, Marcus." The dawn was breaking fully now, painting the sky in gradients of amber and steel. The city looked almost beautiful in this light, if you could forget what lurked in its shadows. Buildings stood like monuments to a civilization that hadn't yet admitted it was dying. A flock of pigeons wheeled overhead, unconcerned with the catastrophe below. We move in stages, Rachel continued. 3 miles to the Greenfield Bridge, which gets us across the river. Then 2 miles through the warehouse district. Low density, lots of cover. Then the final mile into the medical district, which is where things get dangerous. I have a contact who'll meet us at the bridge. He's been running supply routes and knows the warehouse district cold. Who? A man named Jerome, former military. He lost his unit during the initial quarantine breakdown and has been operating independently since. He's reliable. I noticed Rachel's hand was trembling slightly. She shoved it into her pocket when she caught me looking. This was costing her something, this competence, this controlled exterior. Underneath it, she was as frightened as the rest of us. She was just better at architecture, at building walls around the fear so it couldn't collapse outward. Thank you, I said, for finding him, for calling me. She held my gaze for a moment. Whatever passed between us had too many layers for the moment to bear. We should move, she said. Daylight's burning. We moved. The first 3 miles passed in relative quiet. Rachel took point, moving with a confidence that spoke to experience I hadn't known she'd accumulated. She navigated side streets and cut-throughs with practiced ease, checking corners with quick, disciplined glances, signaling us forward with hand gestures that suggested someone had trained her in the weeks since we'd last spoken. Danny kept pace admirably. She moved with the alert energy of someone running on adrenaline and determination, her baseball bat gripped in one hand, her eyes scanning constantly. Twice she grabbed my sleeve and pointed. Once at a figure 2 blocks distant, standing motionless on a rooftop. Once at what appeared to be a blood trail leading into a parking garage. Both times, we adjusted course without discussion. The city in daylight was a different creature than the city at night. The infected were less active under the sun, not dormant, but slower, less responsive. The prevailing theory, shared through fragmented radio broadcasts and survivor networks, was that their degraded nervous systems processed visual stimuli poorly. They relied more on sound and movement detection than sight. Daylight didn't make them harmless. It made them sluggish, a crucial distinction that had saved lives. We saw clusters of them as we moved. A group of 5 standing in a convenience store parking lot, swaying slightly, facing different directions, like broken compasses. A lone figure walking in circles in a playground, its feet tracing a path that had worn visible marks in the grass. 2 more actually sitting, on a bus stop bench. Their postures a grotesque mockery of commuters waiting for a route that would never run again. They're learning, Danny whispered as we crept past the bus stop pair. Or remembering, muscle memory. Don't anthropomorphize them, Rachel said without turning. That's how people hesitate. Hesitation kills. It was harsh, but I understood her point. The infected were no longer the people they'd been. The virus, or whatever it was, since no official designation had survived the communication collapse, rewrote them. Erased consciousness while leaving the autonomic nervous system functional. They breathed, they moved, they responded to stimuli. But the person was gone. Every scientist who'd managed to broadcast findings before the networks died agreed on that much. Still, watching those 2 sit on that bench, I felt something crack in my chest. Someone had waited at that stop every morning. Someone had a routine, a destination, a purpose. Now they sat forever, going nowhere, waiting for nothing. We reached the Greenfield Bridge at 7:15 a.m. The structure spanned the Morrison River, not a large crossing of maybe 200 meters, but it represented a boundary. On this side, The infection density was managed, survivable with caution. On the other side, we'd be entering territory that had been abandoned by organized evacuation efforts on day 7. Jerome was waiting at the bridge's eastern entrance, positioned behind a concrete barrier where he'd have sight lines in both directions. He was older than I expected, maybe 50, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of physical economy that military service etches into a body. He wore a tactical vest over civilian clothes, and a machete hung at his hip in a makeshift sheath. "Rachel." He nodded as we approached. His eyes moved over Danny and me with professional appraisal. "These your people?" "Marcus is the one with family inside Mercy. Danny is medical." "Medical is useful." He shook Danny's hand, then mine. His grip was measured, firm but not performative. "Bridge is clear. I crossed it twice yesterday, mapping the route through the warehouses. But we need to move through it before midday." "Why midday?" I asked. "The warehouse district has a herd, maybe 60, 70 infected. They move in a loose pattern, circulate through the central corridor of buildings between roughly noon and 4, then disperse toward the river at dusk. We want to be through before they consolidate." A herd. The word had become common parlance. Groups of infected that moved together, drawn by some shared stimulus or perhaps simply by each other. Herds were unpredictable. They could shift direction without warning, accelerate without apparent cause. "Then let's not waste daylight," Rachel said. We crossed the bridge in single file. The warehouse district sprawled before us like a canyon system built from corrugated metal and loading docks. Buildings rose on either side, massive, windowless structures that had housed shipping companies, manufacturing operations, cold storage facilities. Now they stood silent, their roll-up doors frozen in various positions of open and closed, revealing darkened interiors that could hold anything. Jerome led us through with quiet authority, choosing paths that kept us between buildings rather than in the open central road. The concrete beneath our feet was oil-stained and cracked, weeds pushing through in defiant green lines. Pigeons nested in the rafters of open warehouses, their cooing an unexpectedly domestic sound in this abandoned industrial landscape. "Stay left," Jerome murmured, guiding us along the wall of a textile warehouse. "There's an open section ahead, a loading yard where 3 buildings converge. We need to cross it, but I want to check sight lines first." He held up a fist, military stop signal. And we pressed against the wall while he advanced to the corner and peered around it. Seconds passed. He waved us forward. The loading yard was roughly the size of a basketball court, open to the sky, bordered by warehouses on 3 sides and a chain-link fence on the 4th. 2 trucks sat in the yard, their trailers still attached, doors hanging open. Between them, scattered on the ground, were personal effects: suitcases, bags, children's toys. This had been a gathering point. An evacuation site, maybe, that hadn't worked out. We moved quickly across the open ground. My skin prickled with exposure. The sensation of being visible, targetable, vulnerable. Every second in the open was a second something could see us, hear us, decide we were worth pursuing. Halfway across, Danny stumbled. Her foot caught on something, a strap from a duffel bag. And she went down hard, her baseball bat clattering against the concrete with a sound that echoed off every metal surface in the yard. We froze. The echo died slowly, absorbed by the warehouses. Jerome's hand went to his machete. Rachel dropped into a crouch. I gripped my crowbar and turned in a slow circle, scanning every doorway, every shadow. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, movement. Inside one of the trailers, something shifted, a sound like dragging, like weight being redistributed against a metal floor. "Up," Jerome whispered to Danny. She was already rising, ignoring the blood on her palms from the concrete. "Move, now, other side, go." We abandoned stealth for speed. 20 meters to the far edge of the yard, where a narrow alley between warehouses offered cover. We covered it in seconds, slipping into the alley's shadow just as a figure appeared in the trailer's doorway. It was a woman, or had been. She stood in the trailer's opening, framed by darkness, her head turning slowly. She'd heard the sound but couldn't locate its source. Her movements were the characteristic scanning pattern. Head rotation, body following, searching for the stimulus that had penetrated her degraded awareness. We pressed against the alley wall, motionless, breathing through our mouths to minimize sound. The woman in the trailer continued her scan for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she turned back into the trailer's interior and the dragging sound resumed. Jerome released a slow breath. "Lucky," he said, almost inaudibly. "If there had been more—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. We continued through the warehouse district, more carefully now. Danny's fall had shaken her confidence. I could see it in the tightness of her shoulders, the way she placed each foot with exaggerated care. But she didn't slow down, didn't ask to stop. Whatever she was made of, it included a refusal to be the one who held others back. Jerome navigated us through 2 more blocks of warehouses, then through a torn section of chain-link fence, and into a residential street that marked the border between the warehouse district and the medical quarter. Here, the houses were smaller, workers' cottages from a previous era, now standing empty with their doors open like mouths frozen mid-scream. The hospital was close now. We could feel it pulling us forward. The transition from residential streets to the medical district was marked not by signage or architecture, but by density. The infected population thickened like fog rolling in from a coast. First 1 visible in a yard, then 3 on a corner, then a dozen scattered across a 4-way intersection 2 blocks ahead of us. Jerome raised his fist and we stopped behind a parked ambulance, one of several that lined the road leading to Mercy General. Its lights were dark, its back doors open, the stretcher inside still made up with clean white sheets, now spotted with brown stains. A paradox of readiness and aftermath. "This is where it gets real," Jerome said, his voice barely above a breath. "From here to the utility building is 4 blocks. The density increases with every step. We need to move from cover to cover. Vehicles, buildings, anything solid between us and sight lines." I looked at the intersection ahead. The infected there were stationary, that low-energy daytime state. But their positions created a gauntlet. To move through, we'd need to pass within 10 meters of at least 2 of them. "Can we go around?" Danny asked. "Going around adds 6 blocks and takes us past the emergency department. That's where the heaviest concentration is." Jerome shook his head. "Through is the only viable path." Rachel was studying the terrain with an intensity I recognized. The same focus she'd brought to her architecture projects. That complete absorption in spatial problem-solving. "The ambulances," she said. "There's a line of them. If we move under and between them, we have cover for most of the first block." She was right. The ambulances were parked bumper to bumper along the left side of the road, creating a continuous wall of metal. Crouching between them, we'd be hidden from the intersection. "Good," Jerome said. "First block, ambulance cover. Second block, there's a medical office building with a ground floor corridor that runs most of its length. Third block, we use the parking garage. Enter on this side, exit on Oakmont. Fourth block is open ground to the utility building. The fourth block, I said. 20 meters, open, with infected in the area. Jerome's expression was grave. We'll need a distraction, something to pull attention away from our movement. What kind of distraction? I have a flare, military grade. It'll burn hot, make noise, create light. The infected will orient toward it. We throw it in the opposite direction from our movement. It buys us maybe 45 seconds before they lose interest. 45 seconds to cross 20 meters? To cross it silently, with 4 people, in a controlled manner that doesn't create additional noise? 45 seconds is tight. I looked at my companions. Danny's jaw was set with determination. Rachel's eyes were already mapping the route, committing it to memory. Neither of them suggested turning back. Neither of them weighed the personal cost against the mission's value aloud, though I knew they must have been calculating it internally. This wasn't their grandfather in that hospital. This wasn't their debt to repay. "Why are you doing this?" I asked Rachel, quietly enough that the others might not hear. She looked at me. For a moment, her controlled exterior softened, and I saw the woman I'd spent 2 years with, the one who cried at documentaries about elderly people, who sent handwritten cards to friends in hard times, who believed that love was less about grand gestures and more about showing up consistently. "Because Gerald called me his granddaughter," she said. "Even after we split up. Even when I ran into him at the grocery store months later. He hugged me and called me his granddaughter and asked if I was eating enough." She blinked hard. "So yes, I'm doing this." I wanted to say something adequate to the moment. Nothing came that wasn't too small or too large. So I nodded, and she nodded, and we turned back to the task of navigating through a graveyard that didn't know it was one. "Ambulance line," Jerome said. "On my mark, stay low, stay quiet, and whatever happens, don't run." We slid beneath the first ambulance like children playing some terrible game. The undercarriage was low. I had to flatten myself against the asphalt, the smell of oil and old rubber filling my nostrils. My pack scraped against the vehicle's underside, and I winced at each tiny sound. Danny was beside me, moving with surprising fluidity, her smaller frame an advantage in this cramped space. We crawled forward, vehicle to vehicle, using the gaps between bumpers to verify the route ahead before committing to the next section. The ground was littered with debris, medical packaging, rubber gloves, a stethoscope that someone had dropped and never retrieved. Each object was a potential noise hazard, requiring careful navigation. Beneath the third ambulance, I heard them. Footsteps, not human footsteps with their purposeful rhythm, but the irregular shuffle of infected locomotion. Close, on the other side of the vehicle. I turned my head and saw feet through the narrow gap between the ambulance's tires and the road. Bare feet blackened, the toenails cracked and lifting. They moved past slowly, directionlessly, and continued down the road behind us. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We emerged from the ambulance line at the end of the first block, slipping into the shadow of the medical office building Jerome had identified. Its glass front door was shattered, but the interior corridor was intact. A long hallway lined with examination rooms and administrative offices. We moved through it quickly, passing doors that stood open to reveal scenes of hasty abandonment. A desk covered in patient files, a computer screen still on, displaying a screensaver of tropical fish. A coffee mug with lipstick on its rim, its contents long evaporated to a dark ring. The corridor delivered us to the building's far exit, which opened onto the second block. Here, Jerome paused at the door, assessing what lay beyond. The parking garage rose across the street. A 5-level concrete structure with vehicle ramps spiraling upward. Its ground floor was visible through the open entrance, and I could see cars inside, parked in their spaces, waiting for owners who would never return. 2 in the street, Jerome reported, both facing away. We cross in pairs, Rachel and Danny first. Marcus and I follow. The garage entrance is 15 meters. Rachel and Danny looked at each other, establishing a wordless partnership. At Jerome's signal, they moved. Quick, controlled steps across the pavement. They reached the garage entrance and pressed themselves against the concrete pillar just inside. Clear. Jerome tapped my shoulder. We moved. 15 meters of exposed road. My boots whispered against the asphalt. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at the 2 infected forms I could sense in my peripheral vision. Don't look. Don't acknowledge. Movement draws movement. We made it. Inside the garage, the air was cooler, the concrete creating a cavern effect. Our footsteps echoed slightly despite our care. We moved between parked cars, a minivan with child seats visible through the window, a sports car with its convertible top down, a delivery van with a florist's logo on its side. Normal vehicles, normal life, frozen and preserved like insects in amber. The garage's far side opened onto Oakmont Avenue. Jerome led us to the exit, and we could see it. The utility building. A squat, unremarkable structure of gray brick set back from the street behind a metal fence. Between us and it, the final 20 meters of open ground. And between us and it, infected. I counted 7 in visible range. 3 clustered near a bench. 2 walking slowly in parallel, like partners on a stroll. 2 more standing at the far end of the street, facing away. 7 in open daylight, in 20 meters. Jerome reached into his vest and produced the flare. Red casing, military markings. He held it with the practiced comfort of someone who deployed hundreds. When I throw, he said, you walk, not run, walk. Controlled, silent, directly to the fence gate. Rachel has the bolt cutters for the lock. Rachel was already pulling them from her duffel. Small ones, but sufficient. Ready? Jerome asked. We weren't. But we nodded anyway. The flare arced through the air like a red comet, trailing sparks and smoke as it sailed over the rooftops and landed somewhere on the far side of Oakmont Avenue. It hit pavement and erupted, a searing red light accompanied by a sharp, hissing sound that filled the street. Every infected head turned. Every dead gaze oriented toward the light and noise with mechanical precision. The 3 at the bench began moving toward it. The 2 walkers changed direction, drawn like compass needles toward magnetic north. Even the distant pair shifted orientation. Now, Jerome said. We moved, out of the garage, across the sidewalk, into the street. 20 meters. Rachel in front with the bolt cutters, Danny behind her, me following, Jerome at the rear facing backward, watching the infected move away from us with each step. The fence appeared before us. A simple chain-link structure, maybe 7 feet high, with a padlocked gate. Rachel reached it and fitted the bolt cutters to the lock's hasp. The metal resisted for a moment. A terrible moment of frozen effort. Then gave with a snap that seemed deafening in my heightened awareness. The gate swung inward. We filed through. 1, 2, 3, 4. Jerome pulled the gate shut behind us and held it closed. Beyond the fence, the utility building's entrance was a metal door with no external handle, a push-bar exit only. But beside it, a basement window well descended below ground level, covered by a steel grate. The grate, Rachel said, pointing. That's our way in. Jerome moved to it and knelt, examining the bolts that secured it to the concrete frame. They were rusted, but not corroded beyond removal. He produced a socket wrench from his vest. The man was a walking hardware store, and began working the first bolt. I stood watch, facing the fence, watching the street beyond. The flare's light was already dimming, its red glow fading from the building faces. The infected that had been drawn toward it were beginning to slow, their interest waning as the stimulus died. Soon they'd return to their aimless patterns. Some might drift back this direction. "Jerome," I said. "Time." "I know." He was on the second bolt. 3 to go. His hands worked with steady speed, not rushing, not fumbling, but not wasting a single motion. Danny stood close to me, her bat ready, her breathing controlled. "How long before they come back?" she asked. "Depends on what else catches their attention. Could be 30 seconds. Could be 5 minutes. Optimistic assessment? 3 minutes. Jerome popped the third bolt, then the fourth. The fifth resisted, its threads seized with years of oxidation. He applied pressure, the wrench creaking, the bolt refusing to yield. He shifted position, braced his knee, and put his full weight behind it. The bolt sheared. The grate lifted free, revealing a narrow shaft dropping into darkness. A basement window opening, perhaps 3 feet wide. "I'll go first," Rachel said. She sat on the edge, legs dangling into the shaft, then pushed off. I heard her boots hit a floor below. A pause. Then her voice, barely audible. "Clear. 4-foot drop. Come down." Danny went next, lowering herself with care, disappearing into the dark rectangle. Then me, the pack barely fitting through the opening, scraping concrete on both sides. I landed on a dusty floor, the smell of machinery and old lubricant surrounding me. Rachel clicked on a flashlight, illuminating a basement filled with pipes, valves, and industrial equipment. Jerome came last, pulling the grate back over the opening behind him. It wouldn't fool a determined searcher, but from the street, it would look undisturbed. We stood in the utility building's basement, breathing hard, our flashlights casting overlapping circles on concrete walls. The tunnel entrance should be here, somewhere in this mechanical underworld. Rachel was already moving, her flashlight tracking along the far wall. "There," she said, "behind the boiler unit." A steel door, unmarked, painted the same gray as the walls, almost invisible unless you knew to look. She pulled the handle. It opened with a groan of disused hinges, revealing a narrow corridor stretching into blackness. The path to my grandfather led into the dark. The tunnel was older than the hospital itself, a relic from an era when underground infrastructure was built with stone and iron rather than plastic and prefabrication. The walls were damp brick, the ceiling low enough that Jerome had to walk with a constant stoop. Pipes ran along the upper walls, steam pipes, their insulation crumbling and hanging in asbestos-laden strips that we carefully avoided touching. Our flashlights created a moving pool of light that revealed the tunnel in sections. 20 feet of visibility, then darkness in both directions. The floor was concrete, puddled with condensation, our footsteps creating splashing sounds that echoed ahead of us. The air was thick with humidity and the mineral smell of old water on old stone. We walked in silence for perhaps 5 minutes before the tunnel branched. Left continued straight ahead, right angled upward slightly toward what would be the hospital's foundation level. "Right," Rachel said. She was navigating from memory. Instructions given by radio, transcribed, memorized, map destroyed for security. If anyone captured that information, The sealed zone's only advantage would be compromised. We took the right branch. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing us into single file. I could feel the weight of the building above us, a psychological pressure more than a physical one. Somewhere above these bricks, above the concrete and steel, my grandfather was breathing, alive, waiting. The tunnel ended at another steel door, this one newer, its surface clean of the rust and age that marked everything else down here. A sign was bolted to it. Boiler room, authorized personnel only. Rachel knocked. 3 quick, 2 slow, a pattern prearranged with the contacts inside. Silence. Then footsteps on the other side. Quick, purposeful, living footsteps. A bolt slid back, then another. The door opened inward, revealing a face illuminated by overhead fluorescent light that seemed blindingly bright after the tunnel's darkness. The man was middle-aged, Southeast Asian, wearing a hospital maintenance uniform with the name David stitched above the pocket. His expression moved through suspicion, recognition, and relief in rapid succession. "Rachel," he said, "they told me you were coming, but I didn't." He looked past her at our group. "4 of you? Jerome is our guide. Danny is medical. Marcus is Gerald Whitfield's grandson." David's face changed at my grandfather's name. Something I couldn't fully read. Was it concern? Worry? "Come in," he said. "Quickly. We don't keep this door open longer than necessary." We filed through into the boiler room. A cavernous space filled with massive heating units, now silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, powered by what I could only assume was the hospital's backup generator system. David sealed the door behind us, sliding 3 separate bolts home. "How is he?" I asked immediately. The words had been sitting in my throat since Rachel's phone call, and I couldn't hold them any longer. David's hesitation lasted a fraction too long. "He's stable," he said carefully. "But the doctors will want to speak with you about his condition. He was brought in before the lockdown with cardiac symptoms. They were running tests when everything—" He gestured vaguely. "When everything happened. Take me to him." "I will. But first, you need to understand our situation here." David led us through the boiler room toward a service elevator. The North Wing has 43 survivors. 12 are patients with various conditions, your grandfather included. 8 are medical staff. The rest are civilians who made it inside before we sealed. "Resources?" Jerome asked. "We have the pharmacy stock from the North Wing, significant medications, but nothing that replaces food. Water is still running on this side. The mains haven't failed yet. Food." David pressed the elevator button and the doors opened immediately. "Food is what's killing us. We had the cafeteria stock for the North Wing's floor, but that was meant for 3 days of normal operation. We've been rationing for 19 days. The elevator rose 1 floor. The doors opened onto a hospital corridor, and the full weight of what had happened here became visible. The corridor was transformed. Hospital beds lined both walls, pushed out of rooms to create a communal sleeping area. People lay in them or sat on their edges, thin, tired, watching us with the guarded curiosity of those who'd been isolated too long. Makeshift curtains created privacy partitions from bed sheets hung on IV stands. The air was stale, recycled, carrying the layered odors of unwashed bodies, antiseptic, and the particular mustiness of a space sealed against the outside world. A woman approached, tall, authoritative, wearing a doctor's coat over scrubs that had seen better weeks. Her name tag read, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. She moved with the efficiency of someone operating on reserves they'd depleted long ago. "You're the outside group," she said. Not a question. David radioed when you entered the tunnel. Her eyes moved across us, pausing on Danny. Medical? Second-year nursing, Danny said. Good enough. I'll orient you later. We need hands. She turned to me. You're the Whitfield family. His grandson, Marcus. Her professional exterior softened by a degree. Come with me. The rest of you. David will show you the situation room. We'll convene in an hour to discuss extraction options. Rachel touched my arm briefly as I followed Dr. Okonkwo. A gesture of support, of continuity. Then she was gone with the others, and I was walking through a hospital ward that felt more like a refugee camp. Dr. Okonkwo led me through a set of double doors into what had been a private wing. Individual rooms with actual walls and doors reserved for patients whose conditions required constant monitoring. She stopped at the third door on the left. Before you go in, she said, I need to tell you something. Your grandfather's cardiac event was significant. He had a myocardial infarction 3 days before the outbreak reached critical levels. We performed an intervention, stenting, which was successful. But his recovery has been complicated by the stress of the situation, limited nutrition, and his age. Is he going to be okay? She met my eyes with the practiced honesty of a doctor who'd learned that false hope was crueler than hard truth. He's stable, he's conscious, he's lucid, but he's not strong enough to walk out of here under his own power. Whatever extraction plan you're developing needs to account for that. I absorbed this. My grandfather, the man who'd hiked mountain trails into his 70s, who'd insisted on shoveling his own driveway every winter despite my protests, was now too weak to walk. The virus hadn't touched him, but the world it created had brought him to his knees, regardless. Can I see him? She opened the door. The room was small, dimly lit by a single overhead fixture. Medical equipment lined one wall. Monitors, IV stands, oxygen supply. And in the bed, propped slightly upright by pillows, was Gerald Whitfield. He'd lost weight. His face, always lean, was now gaunt, the bones visible beneath papery skin. His white hair was uncombed, longer than he'd ever have allowed under normal circumstances. An IV line ran into his left hand, and a nasal cannula delivered supplemental oxygen. But his eyes, those blue-gray eyes that had always held such sharpness, such life, were open. And when they found me, they filled with something that broke and rebuilt me simultaneously. Marcus. His voice was thin but clear, the ghost of a smile. Took you long enough, boy. I was at his bedside in 2 steps, my hand finding his. His grip was weak but deliberate, fingers closing around mine with intention. I'm sorry, I said. The words were inadequate, and I knew it, but they were all I had. I should have come sooner. I should have... You're here now. He squeezed my hand. That's what matters. That's always what matters. His eyes studied my face with that particular grandfather attention, cataloging changes, assessing well-being. You look thin. Are you eating? I laughed, a broken sound, half sob. The world was ending, and Gerald Whitfield wanted to know if I was eating enough. I'm eating, I said. I sat with him for 20 minutes, holding his hand, telling him carefully edited versions of the outside world. I told him about the barricades and the routines I'd established. I told him about the survivor networks forming, the supply runs, the ways people were adapting. I didn't tell him about the bodies I'd seen, the screaming I'd heard through walls, the man I'd hit with the crowbar, the way loneliness in apocalypse wasn't romantic or contemplative, but rather a grinding, parasitic presence that consumed rational thought. He told me about the hospital, about the first hours of chaos, when the infected began appearing in the emergency department and the staff realized what was happening. About Dr. Okonkwo's decision to seal the North Wing, a decision that had saved 43 lives and condemned others in the building to a fate no one in this wing spoke about the nights when they could hear sounds through the sealed doors, about learning to sleep with that knowledge. "There's a man here," Gerald said, his voice dipping lower. Thomas Reed. He was a hospital administrator before. He's been pushing to take charge. Says the doctors don't understand crisis management, that we need military-style command structure. Is he dangerous? He's afraid, and afraid men with authority are always dangerous. Gerald's gaze was steady. He's been talking about rationing differently, about who deserves full portions and who doesn't, about the patients being a resource drain. The implication settled in my stomach like cold metal. He wants to cut patient rations. He hasn't said it directly. He's smarter than that. But he's been building consensus among the civilians, framing it as practical necessity. The medical staff opposes him, but they're outnumbered and exhausted. I understood now why Rachel's contact had emphasized urgency. It wasn't just the food running out. It was the social structure inside this sealed ward beginning to fracture along predictable fault lines. Resources diminishing, trust eroding, the veneer of cooperation peeling back to reveal the calculus of self-preservation. "I'm going to get you out of here," I said. "Marcus." His hand tightened on mine with surprising strength. "Don't make promises you can't keep. I raised you better than that." "It's not a promise. It's a plan." He studied me again, looking for something, apparently finding it. "You've changed," he said quietly. "There's something in your eyes that wasn't there before." I didn't know if that was good or bad. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. A knock on the door interrupted us. David's face appeared. "Marcus, they're ready in the situation room." I squeezed Gerald's hand. "I'll be back." "I know you will." "And Marcus?" I paused at the door. "Rachel's here?" "She's here." A small smile. "Good. That girl has more steel in her than she knows." The situation room was a converted conference space on the North Wing's second floor. A long table dominated the center, covered with maps, lists, and hand-drawn diagrams. Around it sat our group, Rachel, Danny, Jerome, along with Dr. Okonkwo, David, and 3 others I hadn't met. 2 nurses and a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Robert, a structural engineer who'd been visiting his wife in the maternity ward when the lockdown occurred. His wife had delivered their daughter 3 days into the isolation. Both were healthy. Both were trapped. And at the far end of the table, arms crossed, watching us with undisguised skepticism, was a man whose body language radiated authority he'd claimed rather than earned. Thomas Reed, mid-50s, thick-set, wearing a hospital administrator's blazer over rumpled slacks. His badge still hung from his pocket, a small flag of institutional identity in a world where institutions had dissolved. "So," Reed said, before Dr. Okonkwo could begin, "these are our saviors? A handful of civilians who managed to sneak through one tunnel." His tone carried the particular condescension of a man who'd been important before and refused to accept he wasn't it anymore. "They know the outside terrain," Dr. Okonkwo said evenly, "which is more than anyone in this room can claim." The tension in the room had geometry, angles and pressures I could map. This was going to be complicated. The planning session devolved within 15 minutes. Not into chaos, Thomas Reed was too controlled for that, but into a deadlock that revealed the fractures in this survivor group with painful clarity. The facts were these. 43 people needed to evacuate. 12 were patients with varying levels of mobility. My grandfather among the least mobile. The food supply would last perhaps 3 more days at current rationing. The north wing's sealed doors were holding. But the infected in the rest of the hospital were active, and any breach would be immediate and catastrophic. Jerome laid out the extraction options with military precision. Option 1. Evacuate through the same tunnel we'd entered. Problem: the tunnel was narrow, the journey required physical exertion, and 12 patients couldn't make it without assistance that would slow everyone to a crawl. With 43 people moving through confined space, the noise alone could attract attention to the utility building entrance. Option 2. Clear a path through the hospital's south wing to the parking structure, where vehicles might still be functional. Problem: the south wing was the most heavily infected section. Jerome estimated 50 or more inside the building itself. Clearing it without firearms, they had none, was fantasy. Option 3. Signal for external rescue. The ham radio that had contacted Rachel's group could broadcast on wider frequencies. If military or organized survivor groups were monitoring, help might come. "We've been broadcasting for 12 days, David said. No response. "Because no one's coming," Reed interjected, leaning forward on the table. "That's the reality none of you want to accept. No military, no government, no cavalry. We're on our own, and we need to make decisions accordingly." "What decisions, specifically?" Dr. Okonkwo's voice was calm but edged. Reed looked around the table, building his audience. "We can't move 43 people. We can move 20, maybe 25. The strongest, the most capable, those who can contribute to survival on the outside." His eyes didn't move toward the patient wing, but everyone knew where his logic pointed. "We're not leaving patients behind," I said. The words came out harder than I intended. Reed turned his gaze to me. "You arrived 3 hours ago. You don't have standing to—" "His grandfather is one of those patients," Rachel said. "And more importantly, he's right. We evacuate everyone, or we find a way that works." Sentimentality isn't strategy. Neither is cowardice dressed up as pragmatism. Rachel's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. I remembered this version of her. The one who'd argued with landlords, negotiated raises, dismantled condescension with surgical precision. Reed's face darkened. Around the table, I could see the division physically manifesting. The medical staff aligned with Dr. Okonkwo. Some civilians leaned toward Reed, fear pulling them toward whoever projected the most certainty, regardless of moral cost. Others remained visibly undecided. Jerome cut through the building tension. There might be a fourth option. He'd been studying a blueprint of the hospital that someone had recovered from the administration files. The roof. We looked at him. Mercy General is a 12-story building. The roof has a helipad, standard for a hospital this size. But more relevant, it has roof access from the north wing's stairwell. If we can get to the roof, we're above the infected. They don't climb. They don't access vertical spaces unless they're already on that level. "We can't stay on the roof indefinitely," Reed objected. "No, but from the roof, we have sight lines across the city. We can signal. We can assess the infected density at ground level. And—" Jerome traced a line on the blueprint. "The building next door is an office complex. 8 stories. Its roof is 4 stories below the hospital roof. The gap between buildings is approximately 6 meters. You want to bridge that gap?" Robert the engineer leaned forward with sudden interest. "Can it be done?" Robert's mind was already working, I could see calculations running behind his eyes. 6 meters, with materials available in a hospital. Steel bed frames are approximately 2 meters long. Bolted together, 3 frames could span it. With a plywood base, there's construction material in the sealed storage on level 4. The storage level hasn't been cleared, Dr. Okonkwo warned. Then we clear it, Jerome said. The plan crystallized over the next 4 hours. It was audacious, perhaps recklessly so, but it offered something Reed's pragmatic abandonment didn't. A chance for everyone. Robert calculated load tolerances, material requirements, and construction timelines. Jerome mapped the stairwell access from the north wing to the roof. Dr. Okonkwo organized the patients by mobility, creating an evacuation order that prioritized those least able to move quickly. The critical vulnerability was the storage level. Level 4 of the north wing had been sealed along with everything else, but it shared a floor with the hospital supply depot, and no one had verified whether infected had been present on that level when the lockdown occurred. If the storage floor was compromised, accessing the construction materials Robert needed would require confronting the dead in close quarters. A scouting team was assembled. Jerome, myself, David, and a civilian named Marcus Washington, a former construction worker who'd been visiting his mother when the outbreak hit. We shared a first name and a determination that made us quick allies. He was built like the work he'd done. Broad-shouldered, calloused hands, pragmatic in assessment. Reed opposed the plan vocally but stopped short of trying to prevent it. His position was weakening as hope. The real kind, built on actionable steps rather than comfortable denial, began spreading through the group. People wanted to believe they could all make it. They wanted to be the kind of survivors who didn't sacrifice their weakest. As we prepared to scout level 4, I stopped by Gerald's room. He was awake, propped up slightly, watching the activity in the corridor through his open door with alert interest. "They're planning something," he said, not asking. "We're getting everyone out, through the roof, across to the next building. It's unconventional." Unconventional is just another word for creative when it works. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. "Be careful on that scouting run. This building..." He paused, choosing his words. "It has sounds, at night especially, through the sealed doors. Whatever's on the other floors, it's not dormant." "We'll be careful, Marcus." His voice caught me at the door again, that same pattern, something always left unsaid until the last moment. "Thomas Reed came to see me yesterday, before you arrived." I turned. What did he want? To assess my condition. He asked detailed questions about my mobility, my prognosis, my resource requirements. Gerald's eyes held a hard clarity. He was making a list, Marcus. A list of who's worth saving and who isn't. The anger that moved through me was hot and clean. "He won't touch you." "It's not me I'm worried about. There's a woman 3 rooms down. Elaine, she's on dialysis. Without the machine, she has days. Reed was in her room too." Gerald's hand found mine. "Whatever you're building up there on that roof, build it fast. Men like Reed don't wait for consensus when they've decided something." I carried that warning with me as our scouting team assembled at the stairwell door on the north wing's 3rd floor. The stairwell had been cleared to this level, verified empty, with fire doors sealed at each landing. Level 4's door remained locked from our side. No sounds had been reported from beyond it. Jerome tested the lock, a standard hospital fire door with a push bar. "I'll open it 6 inches, he said. "David, flashlight through the gap. Everyone else, ready positions." We arranged ourselves. David with the flashlight, Marcus Washington with a fire extinguisher he'd repurposed as a blunt instrument. Me with my crowbar, Jerome with his machete. The push bar clicked. The door opened 6 inches. Stale air rushed through, a smell I'd learned to read. Dust, disuse, the faint chemical tang of hospital supplies. But beneath it, something else. Something organic. Something wrong. David's flashlight beam cut through the gap into the corridor beyond. Empty. Stretching away in both directions, doors closed on either side. Ceiling tiles intact. Floor clean. Clear? David whispered. Visually, Jerome said. Open it fully. We go in. The door swung wide, and we entered the unknown. Level 4's corridor stretched approximately 60 meters, with rooms branching off on both sides. The storage depot Robert needed was at the far end, a large double-door space that held everything from construction materials to spare bed frames to maintenance equipment. Between us and it, 30 closed doors that could hold anything. Jerome established protocol. We moved in pairs, checking each room as we passed. One person opened the door, quickly, decisively, while the others stood ready. Clear rooms got marked with a chalk X on their frames. Compromised rooms would be sealed shut and marked with red tape David carried for exactly this purpose. The first 12 rooms were empty. Office spaces, small storage closets, an IT server room humming with dormant equipment. Normal spaces holding no horror. My heartbeat began to slow from its hammering pace towards something manageable. Room 13 changed that. Marcus Washington opened the door with the same efficient motion we'd established. Inside, illuminated by David's flashlight beam, was a nurse's station, a break room of sorts with a table, chairs, a small refrigerator, personal lockers. And in the far corner, slumped against the wall, was a figure. We froze, assessed. The figure wasn't moving. In the flashlight's harsh white beam, I could see it was a man in hospital scrubs, young, maybe 30. His head hung forward, chin on chest. No visible movement of breathing. Jerome raised his machete and moved forward with deliberate steps. 3 meters, 2, 1. He reached out with the machete's flat edge and pressed it against the man's shoulder. The figure slid sideways and crumpled to the floor, completely inert. Dead. Truly dead, not reanimated. No visible wounds, no signs of infection's characteristic tissue degradation. He'd died here of something mundane, dehydration perhaps, or a medical condition untreated when the lockdown sealed him away from help. We stood in silence for a moment. There was no time for ceremony, but there was a collective weight that settled over us. This man had died alone, behind a closed door, while people on the floor below continued surviving. No one had known he was here. David crossed himself quietly. Jerome covered the body with a blanket from a nearby closet. We marked the room and continued. Rooms 14 through 23 were clear. We were making progress, the storage depot growing closer, and a fragile optimism was building in my chest. Then we reached the T-junction, where the main corridor intersected with a shorter cross hallway. And Jerome raised his fist. Sound, ahead and to the left. A rhythmic tapping, like a finger drumming on a surface. Irregular but persistent. Not mechanical, not wind. We pressed against the right wall, barely breathing. Jerome peered around the corner with agonizing slowness. He pulled back, held up one finger, then pointed to the left corridor and made a gesture, hand flat, moving in the characteristic shuffle pattern. One infected, in the cross hallway, between us and the storage depot. My mind raced. We had no firearms, nothing that could neutralize from distance. close quarters engagement was possible, but carried enormous risk. The infected, even in their degraded state, possessed a sudden explosive strength when triggered, an adrenal response unmodulated by the pain perception that normally limited human exertion. Jerome drew us into a huddle. "It's pacing," he breathed, barely audible. "Short pattern, maybe 5 meters back and forth. The storage doors are past it, maybe 10 meters beyond its patrol range." "Can we draw it away?" Marcus Washington asked. "Draw it where? Back toward the stairwell? If it follows us down." "Into a room," I suggested. "Open a door in its path. Create a noise inside. When it enters, we close and barricade the door behind it." Jerome considered this. "That could work, David. Do you see which doors are along that cross hallway?" David risked a glance. 3 doors on the right side. First one is maybe 4 meters from the corner." "Close enough." Jerome nodded. "Marcus, both of you, here's what we do." We listened, we planned, we moved. The execution was surgical. David opened the first door in the cross hallway. It led to an empty examination room, and propped it wide with a doorstop. Then he retreated around the corner. Jerome took a metal clipboard from a nearby nursing station and slid it across the floor of the cross hallway, sending it skittering into the open examination room, where it crashed against the far wall. The tapping stopped. A moment of absolute silence. Then movement. Rapid, sudden, the sound of bare feet on linoleum coming toward the noise. The infected passed the corner where we pressed ourselves flat, a blur of gray skin and hospital gown, and entered the examination room pursuing the sound. Marcus Washington was already moving. He reached the door in 3 steps and slammed it shut. I was behind him with a mop handle we'd scavenged, jamming it through the door handle and bracing it against the corridor wall. Inside, the infected reacted. A sound between a moan and a snarl, followed by the thud of a body hitting the door. The mop handle bowed but held. The door shook but stayed closed. "Storage, now," Jerome commanded. We ran, abandoning silence for speed, down the cross hallway to the storage depot's double doors. They were unlocked. Inside was exactly what Robert had described. Shelves of construction material, steel bed frames stacked against walls, plywood sheets, bolts, tools, a treasure trove of engineering possibility. We spent 20 minutes cataloging what we needed and identifying a route to transport it upward. The service elevator connected this floor to the roof, if it was operational. David tested it. The lights came on, the doors opened, the mechanism hummed. Operational. By noon, we'd made 4 elevator trips, ferrying materials to the rooftop. Robert was already there, his engineer's mind consuming the raw materials and outputting a bridge design. 3 bed frames, welded. He'd found a portable welding kit in maintenance storage, into a 6-meter span. Plywood decking bolted to the frame. Safety rails from dismantled bed guards on either side. It would hold weight. Robert was certain. Not a vehicle, not a crowd, but individuals crossing one at a time, that it would support without question. The math was clean. The physics were favorable. What wasn't favorable was the timeline. Construction would take the rest of the day and into the night. The evacuation itself, 43 people, 12 requiring physical assistance, crossing a makeshift bridge 12 stories above the ground, would need to happen at dawn, when the infected were slowest and visibility was sufficient to navigate safely. That meant one more night inside, one more night with dwindling food, with Thomas Reed circulating among the civilians, with the sealed doors holding back a building full of the dead. We returned to the north wing to find the atmosphere had shifted. Not dramatically, not yet, but in the subtle ways that precede actual conflict. People clustered in groups that hadn't existed that morning. Conversations stopped when we passed. Eyes held assessments they hadn't held before. Dr. Okonkwo met us in the corridor. "Reed called a meeting while you were gone," she said. Her voice was tight with controlled fury. An unofficial gathering. 20 of the civilians attended. What did he say? That the roof plan is suicide. That a bridge 12 stories up is insane. That the smart move is to take the 20 healthiest people and go through the tunnel tonight while the rest. She paused, composing herself. While the rest remain here and wait for rescue that we all know isn't coming. And people are listening. People are hungry, scared, and tired of being sealed in a building with the dead. Yes, they're listening. I found Rachel in the Situation Room, bent over the blueprint, calculating distances with a ruler and pencil. She looked up when I entered, and something in my expression told her everything. "Reed's making his move," she said. "Tonight. He wants to take people through the tunnel tonight. Without the patients. Without anyone who slows him down." Rachel set down the pencil. "Then we make sure the bridge is ready by morning. And we make sure nobody leaves tonight." The confrontation came at dinner, if you could call a quarter ration of canned soup and stale crackers dinner. The North Wing's common area served as a dining space, and all 43 survivors gathered there, plus our group of 4. The room was charged with the particular electricity of a community on the edge of splitting. Reed didn't waste time with preamble. He stood when the food had been distributed and addressed the room with the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to boardrooms and budgets. "I want to be transparent," he said. "We've all heard about the rooftop plan. A bridge, 12 stories up, built from bed frames and plywood, crossing a 6-meter gap over open air." He paused for effect. "I respect the ingenuity, but I won't risk my life on it. And I don't think anyone should be asked to." Murmurs, some nodding. Fear was a more convincing argument than engineering. "The tunnel is proven," Reed continued. "We came in through it. It works. I'm proposing that those who wish to leave through the tunnel do so tonight. Quickly, quietly, in controlled numbers. Those who prefer the roof plan are welcome to attempt it in the morning." "And the patients?" Dr. Okonkwo stood. Her voice cut through the room. "The 12 people who can't traverse that tunnel? What happens to them in your plan, Thomas?" Reed had prepared for this. "They remain here with volunteer medical staff until external rescue can be organized from outside. Once our tunnel group reaches safety, we'll send help back." "Help from where?" "There is no outside infrastructure. You're proposing to leave them to die and calling it a reasonable compromise." The room polarized. I could see it happening in real time. Bodies shifting in chairs, glances exchanged, alliances forming along the fault line Reed had carved. I stood. I hadn't planned to speak, but the sight of this man calmly arguing for the abandonment of my grandfather and 11 other vulnerable human beings bypassed every hesitation in my body. "3 weeks ago," I said, and the room quieted because there was something in my voice I didn't fully control. "I barricaded myself in my apartment and let the world burn around me. I told myself I was being practical, smart, survivalist. What I was being was a coward. I was letting other people's problems stay their problems because solving them was hard and scary." I looked at Reed. "That's what you're doing. You're dressing up abandonment in the language of strategy because it's easier than admitting you're afraid." "We're all afraid," Reed began. "Yes, we are. Which is why the bridge matters. Not because it's safe, it's not. Not because it's guaranteed, nothing is. It matters because it's an attempt to save everyone, all of us, together. And the alternative, the thing you're proposing, is the beginning of a world where we decide who deserves rescue based on how useful they are. I've seen where that logic ends. It ends with each of us alone, surrounded by the people we didn't help, wondering why no one helps us. Silence. Then Danny stood. I'm a nursing student. I came into this knowing I was walking into danger for people I'd never met. The bridge plan is real. Robert is an engineer. The math works. I'll be on that roof at dawn. Jerome stood. Military engineering has built bridges under fire in worse conditions. This is achievable. One by one, others stood. Robert, David, the nurses, civilians who'd been on the fence. A woman holding a newborn, Robert's wife, I realized, stood and said simply, "My daughter is 3 weeks old. If the world she grows up in is one where we leave people behind, I'd rather she didn't." Reed looked around the room, counted his remaining supporters, found the number insufficient. His jaw tightened. Something dangerous moved behind his eyes, the look of a man whose narrative had been taken from him. "Fine," he said. "Dawn." But the way he said it didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like a timer starting. I posted watch outside the stairwell that night. Not officially. Dr. Okonkwo organized a rotation among those she trusted. But I couldn't sleep regardless. Too much adrenaline, too much awareness of what morning would bring. I sat in a plastic chair by the stairwell door with my crowbar across my knees and listened to the hospital breathe. At 2 a.m., footsteps, light, careful, moving through the corridor toward me. I tensed, then relaxed as Rachel appeared from the shadows, carrying 2 cups. "Tea," she said, handing me one. From the last of the break room stock. I took it. The warmth was unreasonable comfort. "You should be sleeping. So should you." She sat in the chair beside mine. For a moment, we just existed together in the fluorescent-lit silence, drinking tea in a besieged hospital at the end of civilization. It was absurd. It was also the most peaceful I'd felt in 19 days. "I'm sorry," I said. "For before, for how I was when we were together." She looked at me. "Which part?" "The distance. The way I kept one foot outside everything. Like if I never fully committed, nothing could hurt me when it ended." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't leave because you were distant, Marcus. I left because I could see how much it was costing you to maintain that distance. It wasn't protecting you. It was consuming you. And watching someone you love eat themselves alive with self-denial isn't something I could sustain." The honesty of it settled in my chest. She was right. She'd always been right. And I'd always known it. And knowing had never been enough to change. "What's different now?" she asked. I thought about it. About the apartment I'd sealed and left. The photo in my pocket. The 12 blocks I'd walked in darkness toward a voice that called me forward. I think, when everything non-essential gets stripped away, the routines, the distractions, the comfortable avoidances, you're left with what actually matters. And what matters is upstairs in a hospital bed. And what matters is sitting next to me right now. Rachel's hand found mine in the space between our chairs. Not romantically, or not only romantically, something deeper. The grip of 2 people who'd seen the same cliff edge and chosen to face it together. At 4 a.m., a crash echoed from somewhere below. We both stood, alert. Then, an alarm. The fire alarm on the sealed doors, triggered by something on the other side. A breach attempt. Infected pushing against barriers? David appeared from the sleeping quarters, followed by Jerome. Dr. Okonkwo was seconds behind. "The seal on the second floor," David said, checking a panel on the wall that showed the building's alarm zones. "Something's testing it." "Will it hold?" Jerome asked. "It's held for 19 days, but it's not designed for sustained assault." The decision was made without discussion. Dawn was 90 minutes away. The bridge was complete. Robert had finished construction at midnight. We wouldn't wait. "Evacuate now, Doctor," Okonkwo said. "All patients first, then everyone else." The North Wing mobilized with the desperate efficiency of people who'd been waiting for exactly this command. Patients were transferred to wheelchairs, to stretchers carried by pairs, to the arms of those strong enough to bear them. My grandfather was lifted by Marcus Washington and Jerome. Carried between them with his arms over their shoulders, his feet barely touching the ground. We streamed toward the service elevator. 12 people per trip, 3 trips to get everyone to the roof. The elevator hummed and rose, hummed and rose. Below us, the alarm continued its shrill cry. Something was changing in the building's structure of safety. The dead were waking up. I stepped into the elevator for the final trip, my grandfather beside me in his wheelchair. Rachel and Danny flanked us. Reed was there too, silent, cooperating. Whatever scheme he'd harbored made irrelevant by the urgency of actual crisis. The doors closed. We rose. 12 stories between us and the sky. The doors opened onto wind and stars and the bridge, our impossible, beautiful, bed-frame bridge, spanning the gap between death and possibility. We crossed one at a time. Gerald went in his wheelchair, pushed by Jerome with absolute steadiness across 6 meters of steel and plywood suspended above nothing. I watched from the hospital roof, unable to breathe until his wheels touched the office building surface on the other side. Everyone made it. 47 people, the original 43 plus our 4, walked, rolled, or were carried across that bridge before the sun fully rose. From the neighboring rooftop, I looked back at Mercy General. I could see movement in its lower windows now, shapes pressing against glass, drawn upward by the sounds we'd made. The North Wing's seal had failed. If we'd waited for proper dawn, for comfortable readiness, for the absence of fear, we'd have died debating the schedule. My grandfather is alive. He's weak, and recovery will be measured in months, not days. But he's breathing. He's here. He called Rachel his granddaughter again as she helped settle him into the ground floor office we've claimed as temporary shelter. I am not the man I was 19 days ago. That man built walls. This one builds bridges. The difference is everything.